My name is Sania Riaz, I'm 32 and I live in Toronto, Canada. I always thought I had the perfect life. A husband I loved, a sister I trusted, and a home filled with laughter. But perfect can be a dangerous illusion. It started subtly. My husband, Arav, began staying late at work, texting in whispers and avoiding eye contact when I asked simple questions. At first, I dismissed it. Everyone gets busy, I told myself. But then came the little things I couldn't ignore. A faint perfume on his shirt that wasn't mine, a lipstick stain on his collar, small receipts from dinners I didn't know about. The first night I truly suspected something, he left his phone on the kitchen counter. Curiosity mixed with a sinking feeling in my stomach pushed me to glance at his messages, and that's when I saw it. Flirty, intimate messages between him and my sister, Nayla. The shock hit me like a punch. My best friend, my confidant, the person I had shared every secret with, was betraying me. And she wasn't alone. My own husband, the man I loved, was helping her. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I knew enough to realize that anger now would only give them the advantage. Instead, I made a quiet vow. I would watch, I would document, and I would make them regret ever thinking they could hurt me. I didn't yet know how deep their betrayal went, or how much damage they had done while I lived in blind trust. But one thing was certain, my life as I knew it had ended that night. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every little laugh I remembered between Arav and Nayla, every secret I had shared with my sister, it all played in my mind like a twisted montage. I felt violated, humiliated, and enraged, but I couldn't act recklessly. If I wanted true revenge, I had to be strategic. For years, I had been a patient, thoughtful person. I believed in trust, in loyalty, but that trust had been weaponized against me. Arav and Nayla thought they could carry on behind my back. They underestimated me. That's when I decided I would quietly collect every piece of evidence, and I would hit them where it hurt the most. I started with the obvious texts, emails, and WhatsApp messages. At first, it felt surreal scrolling through exchanges that made me shiver. Flirtatious jokes, weekend plans, late-night confessions of, "I wish we could be alone." Each message was a dagger, but also a breadcrumb leading me to the bigger picture. I remember crying that night not just out of sadness, but from anger. How could the two people I loved the most betray me so thoroughly? But my tears weren't for them. They were fuel to plan the kind of revenge that would leave them speechless. I didn't confront them directly yet. Instead, I began planting subtle tests. One evening, I casually said to Arav, "Funny, I think I saw Nayla at that cafe you said you went to on your trip." He froze. That small flicker of panic, his eyes darting, a twitch in his voice was confirmation. He knew I was onto him. A few days later, I called Nayla. Not with accusations, not with anger, just calm, deliberate curiosity. "Nayla, I need to understand what's going on between you and Arav. I deserve the truth." Her voice cracked. She stumbled over words, denied, hesitated, and yet every slip confirmed what I already knew. They were sloppy. They had assumed my love blinded me completely. I realized then that I had the upper hand. I had patience, they had arrogance, and arrogance always leaves traces. From that day on, I became meticulous. Every late-night meeting, every unexplained expense, every suspicious text I documented. I even installed cameras in rooms Arav used when I was out, making sure I had video evidence of their secret rendezvous. I traced their financial moves too. I wanted a record so damning that even if they tried to hide or lie, the truth would emerge. By now, I wasn't just a hurt wife or betrayed sister. I was a strategist, quietly turning their betrayal into my weapon. I knew the real showdown would be dramatic, public, and unforgettable. But I had to wait for the perfect moment, and trust me, that moment was coming sooner than they thought. The holiday season was approaching, and what should have been a time of warmth and family joy had become my crucible. Arav had promised to spend Christmas with me and my parents. But deep down, I knew better. The messages I had intercepted told me everything. They were planning a secret getaway together. Nayla and Arav, while the world saw a cheerful holiday season, were laughing behind my back. I remember staring at the fireplace that night, imagining them together, plotting, betraying me in a way I had never imagined possible. My heart ached not for the loss of love, but for the audacity of their deceit. And then a thought crystallized. Why should I continue to be their victim? Instead of confronting them, I sent Arav a casual text. "I'm so excited to see you on Christmas. Can't wait to celebrate with our little family." His reply was delayed. When it came, it was overly formal, clipped. I smiled. Panic, guilt, subtle slips, I could see it through the screen. My presence in his mind had already begun to crack their confidence. Nayla, my sister, my once trusted ally, called me that evening. "Sania, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I kept calm. I let her talk, letting every word, every hesitation, every slip of guilt sink into my mind like proof of their unraveling. Every confession she made, accidental or intentional, became part of the dossier I was quietly assembling. Over the next few days, I gathered the final pieces of evidence. Photos, recordings, bank statements showing joint payments for trips they claimed were work-related or sisterly outings. Everything lined up perfectly to expose them not only emotionally but legally. The breaking point came on Christmas Eve. I was supposed to be preparing for a quiet dinner at home, but Arav didn't show up. I intercepted a call to Nayla, where they were laughing about being free while I waited. I didn't confront them. I stayed calm. I let them feel safe, confident, untouchable, because in their arrogance, they hadn't realized I had the ultimate leverage. I had everything, and the moment I chose would leave them exposed, shamed, and utterly powerless. That night, lying awake, I realized something crucial. Revenge wasn't just about humiliation, it was about justice. I wanted them to understand the weight of their betrayal, to experience the fear, uncertainty, and despair they had imposed on me. And I knew exactly how to make it happen publicly, legally, and irreversibly. By the time Christmas morning arrived, the game had already begun. Little did Arav and Nayla know, the life they had plotted in secret was about to collapse around them. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. Not the theatrics, I didn't want theatrics, but the sequence, the timing, the little details that would make every piece of evidence I had collected land like a hard fact on a witness stand. Revenge, I had decided, would not be a tantrum. It would be inevitable. It would be undeniable. For weeks leading up to the day, I moved like a ghost through our house and our lives. I met with my lawyer in quiet cafes. I signed papers that made my stomach flip in a way that was almost vindicating. I filed for divorce under sealed petition so that the first legal shock would come when their complacency was highest. I arranged for proper copies of everything I'd documented, not the sloppy screenshots of an enraged wife, but official-looking packets of information, organized, dated, cross-referenced. Messages with timestamps, photographed receipts that showed joint bookings for trips they had described as work, bank ledgers with suspicious transfers, voicemail clips, and transcriptions of conversations where their arrogance slipped into confession. When I handed the first packet to my lawyer, the look on his face told me more than any words could. He didn't flinch at the texts. He didn't gasp at the recordings. Instead, he nodded with professional certainty. "This is enough to not just win a divorce. This is enough to make a claim on assets and reputational damage." That was when the reality of how far I could take this settled in me like a cold stone. I wasn't just breaking off a marriage. I was dismantling an entire scaffold of lies they had built around themselves. I planned 2 simultaneous fronts, legal and social. Legally, I sought emergency orders that would freeze certain joint accounts and protect any assets that could be spirited away if they caught wind of what I had. Socially, I controlled the narrative by deciding who would hear what and when. The goal was to collapse their support at the same time the law took hold to turn their private confidence into public isolation. I picked the setting with care. It wouldn't be a melodramatic whisper into a crowded room. It would be a formal legal hearing, a place where words mean something and evidence is not gossip. The morning of the initial hearing, I dressed in a simple navy suit that made me feel measured and fierce. Arav arrived late, like he always did, as if time itself owed him courtesy. Nayla came in after him, eyes wide, trying to compose a smile that wouldn't reach her face. When the judge called our case, and the clerk slid the first bundle of evidence across the bench, Arav's face changed. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the old arrogance drained out of him. He didn't speak. Nayla's fingers trembled in her purse. I watched them from the plaintiff's chair, an odd clarity settling over me. All those secret looks and hidden messages had become a paper trail, and paper is hard to spin into anything but truth. My lawyer presented the text's first short exchanges, then longer late-night threads where words like "can't wait" and "soon" revealed more than I wanted to read. The voicemails were played, a clipped voice laughing in a way I would never forget, then an angry, hurried plea when they thought they might be caught. Then the bank statements, transfers labeled gift, loan, and sometimes nothing at all that corresponded to dates of trips or hotels. I watched as the judge and both counsels leaned forward. The air in the courtroom felt thin. I did not break down. I allowed my voice to stay steady as my lawyer read certain excerpts, and I answered briefly when asked to confirm authenticity. Each yes felt like a hammer blow. With every admission from the record, my world rebuilt itself in clarity. They had lied, connived, and conspired. I had prepared beyond personal records. I had, quietly and with precision, sent summarized evidence packages factual, not vindictive, to the HR departments and professional affiliations relevant to Arav and Nayla. The moment the judge accepted the filings, HR at Arav's company and the organization Nayla volunteered with had what they needed. Within 24 hours, an internal review was opened at Arav's firm. His carefully curated professional image, the man who chaired committees and collected commendations, began to splinter. Parallel to the formal actions, I started telling carefully chosen family members the bare facts. Not long accusatory texts or venomous posts, but measured, documented notes. "I'm proceeding legally. If you have questions, call me." The whispers started. People I had once comforted called my parents. Aunts who had always defended Arav began to ask questions. The little fortress of goodwill they had built around themselves showed cracks, invitations stopped, polite replies grew terse. Seeing them scramble was not pleasureless, it was the exact institution of consequence I had envisioned. Then came the public reveal. I chose a family reunion, a relatively neutral gathering where, historically, both sides of our families had mingled and celebrated. I did not intend to perform a spectacle. I wanted truth under daylight, and witnesses who could not later claim they were unaware. I spoke with my parents beforehand. They came with quiet, pained acceptance. At the reunion, I asked for a quiet moment. People turned. It felt like the entire world held its breath. I did what I had practiced. I stated the facts simply. I read out the timeline, the dates, the messages, the transactions that mapped like a train on a track. I played a short audio clip, one of the recordings they thought was private, and watched the room go still. Some people wept. Others stood frozen. Arav's mouth opened and closed. Nayla's face flushed a color I'd never seen on her. A cousin whispered, "How could they?" Someone else muttered, "I had no idea." But there was one thing that surprised me. While some relatives rallied to comfort me, others recoiled into silence. Families are complicated. Loyalty does not evaporate overnight. I had known this. The loss, though, was a necessary part of the cost. The important thing, the pattern of protection they had enjoyed, the alibis. The polite smiles had been replaced by awkward, pained questions. A neighbor I had once shared coffee with refused to accept a plate of dessert from Nayla that afternoon and handed it back with shaking hands. It was a small thing, but in that smallness was the collapse of a social scaffolding they had relied on. Legally, the papers did what they were meant to do. An interim ruling froze unilateral moves on the house and certain accounts pending full adjudication, and the likely outcome, as my lawyer had said, was that their collusion and breach would result in a significant award in my favor. In plain English, Arav would likely lose his claim to the family home, and the assets would be reevaluated in light of his fraudulent behavior. He could, in theory, fight. He could, in theory, try to paint me as the villain. But the strength of the evidence, the recordings, the bank trails, they were not smoke. They were steel. The immediate fallout was violent in its own way. Arav received a formal suspension from his company that afternoon. An email circulated through Nayla's volunteer network, and calls were made asking for clarification. Friends who had once laughed at their inside jokes now avoided eye contact. I felt a curious mixture of vindication and exhaustion. This was the work I had chosen. This was the consequence I had engineered. I also felt like a person who had crossed a threshold. There was no going back to naive trust. And yet, in the quiet after the storm, I discovered a different truth. Revenge does not necessarily feel triumphant every hour. There were empty rooms in my life where laughter had once lived. My home was quieter because the people I loved were on the outside. Adjusting, rebuilding would take time, but the most important part, I had my agency back. That realization warmed something in me that all the scandal could not touch. They had lost a lot in the first wave, but I knew their world would not simply collapse and remain buried. Retribution begets reaction. I had seen the flicker of panic and the first petitions. I had seen the way they began to scramble. I knew they would not disappear quietly. The first wave had landed. The judge had heard the evidence. HR had opened a review. Friends and family were asking uncomfortable questions. But anyone who's been through this knows revenge is rarely a single thunderclap. It's a campaign. They would retaliate, they would scramble for allies, they would try to rewrite the story. My job now was to make sure there was nowhere for them to hide. Within 48 hours of the public exposure, I started receiving text messages that were equal parts pleading and fury. Arav sent long, rambling messages trying to explain away dates and accounts. Nayla sent one terse note. Sania, we never meant. And then silence. A mutual friend, someone I had confided in years ago, texted me, asking if there was more to the story. I answered with facts and dates, and copies of the documents I'd already given my lawyer. It was important to control the narrative. Unanswered accusations grow into rumors. Predictably, Arav's camp reacted legally. The day after my initial filings, he submitted a counter-petition questioning the credibility of my recordings and demanding access to our joint accounts for his defense. He hired a lawyer whose approach was expensive and theatrical, designed, I suspect, to intimidate. I had expected this. I had expected theatrics. That's why I'd prepared not only the raw data but meticulous chain of custody logs and timestamps, notarized transcriptions, and independent expert verifications of audio authenticity. If he wanted a fight in court, he would get one, but not the kind that favored his spin. When his lawyer tried to claim that the bank transfers were ordinary gifts, my forensic accountant's report arrived in court like a mirror. The report mapped transfers, dates, IP addresses of online banking logins, and annotations tying certain transactions to hotel bookings and rideshare routes that corresponded with messages between Arav and Nayla. The judge read it with visible interest. A hush fell over the room when the auditor explained how the funds were routed through intermediary accounts, a red flag for deliberate concealment. That day, a thin veneer of Arav's plausible deniability cracked wider. Outside court, I focused on the social engine that sustained someone like Arav: friends who would cover, relatives who would rationalize. I spoke individually to a few people I trusted and presented the facts calmly. I didn't shower them with fury or vitriol. I gave them proof. One by one, people who might have defended him found their loyalties wavering under the weight of documents. A club member who had long admired Arav called him to ask for clarification. When offered none, he stepped back publicly. The network that had insulated them began to dissolve. There was a moment of human unpredictability that surprised me. Nayla's best friend, a woman named Zara who had been close to both sisters, reached out not to console Nayla, but to tell me she had seen Nayla's messages months before and had felt conflicted. Zara provided screenshots of conversations where Nayla admitted guilt and anxiety. That single submission turned what was still a murky he said divided by she said into a cascading corroboration. People who had wanted to doubt the story found more reasons not to. Arav's company launched a formal internal investigation. Within days, he was suspended pending review. The firm's leadership, sensitive to optics and client trust, could not risk association with a scandal that included claims of personal impropriety and financial manipulation. Simultaneously, Nayla's volunteer organization convened an emergency meeting and put her roles on hold. I did not gloat. I documented. I filed an official complaint with the organizations and provided evidence packages. My aim was clarity, not cruelty. The critical legal win came when the court issued an interim financial order. My lawyer had argued effectively. Arav's transfers, the joint bookings, and the evidence of collusion indicated fraud in the management of marital assets. The judge ordered a forensic financial review and froze certain transactions. Effectively, this meant that while full adjudication would take time, Arav could not siphon assets away or stake a credible immediate claim to liquidate or remove significant joint property. In practice, the consequence was straightforward. The family home, our home, would not be quietly taken from me without the court's clear say-so. The order was a public and practical blow. They tried other things. Nayla sent a message, indicating she would tell a different story if pressed an attempt to sow doubt. Arav reached out to an old friend, asking for letters of character. One acquaintance, pressured by his salary and social obligations, considered helping, and for a few anxious days I wondered if my careful structure would be undermined. But because I had kept a calm, precise trail and previously secured sworn witness statements, including Zara's, their attempts to muddy the waters were weak and easily countered in court. I don't believe in luck in moments like that, only preparation. There came a day I knew would arrive. Our families were still connected by knots and history, and I had to face certain people who expected me to reconcile. I arranged to meet Nayla in a neutral place, a cafe near my parents' house. I wanted to see her without theatrics, to measure whether there was genuine remorse or only fear. She arrived late, eyes hollow. I spoke first and slowly, presenting facts I knew she couldn't reinterpret. I watched her shrink beneath them. She tried to excuse it. I was lonely, she whispered. He made me feel important. In that moment, pity flickered in me, then steel returned. I had not engineered this to be revenge for the sake of vengeance. I had done it to reclaim dignity. Words like loneliness do not erase betrayal. After that meeting, family dynamics shifted irreversibly. My mother, whose judgment I'd always feared to disappoint, came to me with a small, trembling box. It contained a few letters from our father and a set of family keepsakes, she said softly. You did the right thing. It was a tiny, private reconciliation that meant everything. Elsewhere, relatives started to choose sides. Some offered quiet apologies, others kept distance. The emotional cost of truth had been taxing, but truth had also given me something I hadn't had in years: alignment. Over the next weeks, the legal process continued. A forensic accountant testified in court, and an HR report from Arev's firm confirmed irregularities that matched my evidence. A media outlet sensing a human story contacted me. I refused to speak to them. I wanted the law to be the script, not tabloid speculation. But under the pressure of internal reviews and the visible evidence, Arev's position eroded. The company made him resign quietly. The resignation letter itself was redolent with the language of irreconcilable conduct and breach of trust. The public-facing facade crumbled. Nayla's social circles were less forgiving. People who had once laughed with her now avoided engagements she attended. Invitations ceased. The community that had once admired her opinion now whispered and turned away. She reached out to me once more, this time with a plea for help that carried no entitlement. I forwarded her to counseling resources and declined to reopen any door. Social exile can be kinder than imprisonment. I gave her neither. There were nights when the silence in my house felt like a wound. I missed the ease of ordinary days. I missed the laugh that used to echo in the kitchen when we were a normal family. But those nights were also filled with a new consciousness, a hard-earned knowledge that I could stand alone, that I could place rightful limits on others, and that my children, if I ever had them, would inherit a home without deceit woven into its beams. The legal outcomes had not yet been fully finalized. The court still had to determine full asset division and issue final orders. I knew that even with all the evidence and the public collapses, there remained one final measure I could take to make sure their path back to normalcy would be barred. A carefully constructed public record combined with targeted legal filings that would ensure their professional reputations could not be easily rehabilitated. The weeks after the initial fallout felt like walking through a city rebuilt around a new skyline. Some places were the same, but the view had changed. People who had once been pillars of our social life were now rearranged into smaller, quieter constellations. For me, the work was far from over. I had to make sure what I had achieved was durable, legally airtight, and socially irreversible. My lawyer and I spent long hours drafting final motions, settlement terms, and protective orders. We negotiated carefully. I wanted the house and a fair division of assets. But I also wanted something else, a permanent record that would make it difficult for Arev and Nayla to walk back into leadership positions or influential social roles without a shadow following them. That meant obtaining court findings that explicitly cited their collusion, financial deception, and breach of fiduciary responsibilities where they applied. When the judge issued the final decree, it was clinical, heavy, and precisely what I'd aimed for. The ruling transferred primary ownership of the family home to me, ordered restitution on certain transfers, and included language that recommended professional review of Arev's conduct in his industry, given the documented pattern of deception. The court also entered a restraining-type clarification about access to certain joint accounts and required financial restitution timelines. It was, in legal terms, a cage of measures that would take significant, transparent effort to undo. Shortly after the decree, I received confirmation from the professional body that had been notified quietly months earlier. They had opened a formal ethics review at Arav's level. Not only could he not easily regain his former committee roles, but any reappointment would require disclosure and investigation. It was more than symbolic, it was practical and punitive. I also made a conscious decision about narrative. I could have pursued tabloid stories or revenge posts. Instead, I asked my lawyer to prepare a factual summary of the case that I would provide to relevant community organizations, volunteer groups, and a limited set of family contacts who requested documentation. It was not gossip, it was a public record of actions and consequences. This move prevented spin doctors from gaslighting the story back into ambiguity. Friends asked if I regretted making the story public. I answered simply, no. Truth should not be hidden for the sake of someone else's image. Nayla attempted a final plea. She sent a long email asking for forgiveness, citing panic, shame, and promises of change. I read it once, then filed it away. Her apologies lacked the structural accountability the court had demanded. They didn't include attempts at restitution or meaningful corrective action. In practical terms, an apology without work would not rebuild the trust she'd demolished. I forwarded it to my lawyer for the case record and moved on. There were nights I expected joy to erupt. The house was mine, her calls were ignored, and their reputations were fractured. But instead, a different emotion walked in relief, wrapped in exhaustion. The adrenaline of planning and the heat of vindication cooled into a sober calm. I began to sleep longer, to cook again without thinking of the next evidence-gathering move. The small things, planting bulbs in the spring, hanging new curtains, felt like quiet rebellions against the years of manipulation. Months later, my parents invited me over for a small dinner. There was no TV, no phones, just the slow clatter of cutlery and conversation. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. My father, awkward with things he'd never said before, apologized quietly. It wasn't a theatrical reconciliation. It was small, honest, and deeply human. Those tiny moments, the ones that are easy to underestimate, became the true proof of recovery. Arav lost several client contracts after word of the ethics review reached certain partners. Colleagues who had once avoided the hard questions began to distance themselves. Nayla lost leadership roles in her social committees and saw invitations grow thin. The ripple effects were practical and steady. They weren't immediate theatrical collapses, but they were durable. This was the form of justice I had wanted, bankruptcies of privilege that could not be fixed by charm alone. Not everyone sought to punish. A few community members, caught in the awkward middle, asked for private explanations. One of Nayla's old friends, someone I'd once seen as complicit, took a different route. She asked to meet me alone, not to prod at old wounds, but to offer help. She delivered a small envelope. Inside were notes she'd kept, messages that made her uncomfortable, and which she'd not known how to address. She apologized for her silence. It was awkward, but it mattered. I accepted the apology because not every person in their orbit had been malicious. Complicity often stems from fear and confusion, not intent. Beyond titles and homes, my priority became security, legal, financial, and personal. I changed account numbers, updated beneficiaries, and put protections in place so that if either tried to orchestrate further financial harm, it would be immediately traceable and illegal. I met with a financial planner, sat through boring but necessary meetings about trusts and contingency planning, and set up a life that could not be undermined by manipulation. One evening while shopping, an older woman approached me and said, "I saw your story in a local paper. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." A stranger's validation felt oddly consoling. It reminded me that truth, once visible, can inspire empathy. The revenge had public faces, the consequence had private rewards. Perhaps the most profound change was internal. I no longer looked into mirrors waiting for approval. I no longer asked for permission. I reclaimed hobbies, friends, and the small joys I'd shelved for years. I signed up for a pottery class and laughed when my first bowl came out lopsided. I went to a concert without checking in. These acts were tiny, but they were reclamations, small freedoms that, accumulated, rebuilt a life. 2 years out, Arav started a small consultancy that, because of the public record, required full disclosure to any prospective clients. He could not re-enter his old circles without explaining his past. Nayla moved cities for a time. Her social circle in our hometown evaporated. Neither attempted a public comeback. Their lives continued less gilded, more transparent, but they carried the mark of their choices. There is a line between vengeance and justice, and I walked it carefully. I did not seek to ruin lives for sport. I sought to enforce responsibility. I wanted restoration for myself and a boundary against future harm. When they betrayed me as a team, I dismantled the team not to destroy for pleasure, but because accountability was the only antidote to humiliation. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the moment the judge signed the final order. It still feels like a shutter falling into place, a small mechanical sound that marks the end of a long season. But the sound that lingers now is my daughter-in-law. No, that's not right. My sister calling, my mother's laugh, the clink of dishes in a clean kitchen. Those sounds are proof. The house is mine, not because courts say so, but because it holds life again. They betrayed me as a team. I destroyed them as a team. Not out of cruelty, but out of the cold arithmetic of consequence. Justice, in its slow, methodical way, arrived. And with it, came my life back.
Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this, go watch the one on the left and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of triumph over injustice and a saga of ultimate revenge.